That night should have been the happiest moment of our relationship, but instead, it became the exact point where everything shattered beyond repair. The memory of that night is no longer a single scene, but a permanent, frozen diorama of devastation in the museum of my mind. It was engineered, meticulously planned by the universe or by fate, to be the crystalline pinnacle of our shared journey, a golden hour forever etched into memory. Every sacrifice, every saved dollar, every whispered dream in the dark had been a brick laid on the path leading to that evening. It should have been the validation of 2 years of love, compromise, and synchronicity. The moment where the future we'd so meticulously sketched out together finally began to solidify from hopeful blueprint into beautiful, tangible reality. The air itself should have been thick with the sweet scent of promise and the warm, buttery glow of accomplishment, a testament to us. But instead, in the span of a few venomous, calculated seconds, it became the exact, precise point of catastrophic fracture, the seismic epicenter from which every hope, every plan, and every fragile, cherished piece of us shattered into a million irreparable, glittering shards of dust. My name is Daniel. I'm 27 years old. My girlfriend, my former girlfriend, a title that still feels like an ill-fitting suit, was Emily, 25. For 2 years, we weren't just a couple. We were a small, self-contained universe with its own laws of physics, its own language, its own gravity. We built a lexicon of our own, filled with hieroglyphic inside jokes that would send us into helpless, breathless laughter in the cereal aisle of a grocery store, quiet glances across a crowded room that could convey an entire conversation, and whisper confessions in the blue-hued dark that stretched into the early hours of the morning, secrets traded like precious stones. We shared more than just a bed. We shared a nervous system. We shared a vision, painted in vivid detail. We talked about getting married on a crisp, golden autumn day near the rocky coast of Maine, with a small gathering of those who truly mattered. We dreamed in tandem of moving out of the bustling, anonymous heart of Boston to a quieter, tree-lined neighborhood in nearby Newton or Brookline, where we could hear birdsong contest the morning traffic, and where our future children could ride their bikes on sidewalks without us fearing for their safety. We even tentatively, nervously, joyfully discussed starting a family someday, once our careers were settled and we felt ready to pour our boundless love into a new, tiny life. She wasn't just my partner. She was my confidant, my fiercest cheerleader, the first person I wanted to tell any news to, good or bad. She was the absolute last person I ever thought would become the unwitting architect of my total heartbreak. But all of that beautiful, intricate tapestry of a future, was slowly and methodically poisoned, thread by gossamer thread, by the constant corrosive and ever-present shadow of her so-called best friend, Alex. His presence was a low-grade fever I couldn't shake, a constant drip of acid on the foundation of our happiness. When Emily and I first met at a bustling software firm in downtown Boston, the connection was instant and electric, a jolt that felt both thrilling and destined. Over lukewarm, bitter coffee in a break room that smelled of microwave, popcorn, and toner, she told me about Alex almost immediately, as if offering a crucial, non-negotiable piece of her personal history, a clause in the fine print of dating her. "He's like my brother," she'd said with a fond, dismissive wave of her hand, a smile that seemed to say this explains everything, and you need not inquire further. "We've been through everything together since freshman year of college. He's my person, my platonic soulmate." I remember feeling a flicker of, not jealousy, but a prickle of curiosity, the first faint signal from my gut that this was a dynamic to be noted. I trusted her implicitly, a trust that felt as natural as breathing, and I saw no rational reason to feel threatened by a childhood friend. The picture she painted seemed safe, even commendable, a testament to her loyalty. Alex was, she assured me, in a long-term, serious relationship with a girl named Chloe, who, on the few occasions I'd seen her from a distance, seemed sweet, gentle, and perpetually slightly anxious, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. From the outside, it was a closed loop, a settled quartet. I naively assumed I'd be welcomed into their extended circle as a new, positive addition. I was tragically, monumentally wrong. The first dinner we all had together, a double date at a noisy, family-style Italian restaurant in the North End, meant to be a fun, informal introduction, was a masterclass in subtle, cutting hostility. We arrived to find them already seated, Alex leaning back in his chair with an air of ownership, his arms slung over the back of Chloe's. He sized me up the second we approached the table, his eyes a pale, cool blue, doing a quick, dismissive inventory of my clothes. Did he smirk at my button-down, my posture, my outstretched hand? His handshake was a deliberate, loose, limp fish affair, a calculated lack of engagement. He barely made eye contact, his gaze already sliding past me to Emily. Within minutes, after the barest of pleasantries, he made a comment that was expertly crafted to seem like an off-the-cuff joke, but landed with the precision of a shiv. "So, you're the new guy? Huh. You don't really look like the type Emily usually goes for. The finance brothers. You seem nicer." He let that hang in the garlic-scented air, watching my reaction over the rim of his beer glass, challenging me to take the bait. I forced a laugh, a hollow, uncomfortable sound that died in my throat. I saw Chloe shift in her seat, her eyes dropping to her menu, as if with the most fascinating text sheet ever read. Emily just rolled her eyes with an affectionate exasperation and punched him lightly on the arm. "Ignore him, Daniel," she said, her tone light, as if he were a mischievous, beloved child who'd said a naughty word. "He's just being an idiot. He thinks he's funny." I told myself, and later her, that it was just a bad first impression, a bit of misplaced protective energy from a long-time friend. But my gut, that primal organ, knew better. It wasn't an impression. It was an opening salvo in a war I hadn't known I was enlisted to fight. And the campaign never ceased. It was a war of attrition. Over the next 2 years, Alex's jokes became the relentless, grating soundtrack to our social life. His sarcasm was a weapon he wielded with the precision of a surgeon, always aiming for the weakest joint in my armor. If I offered an opinion in a group discussion about politics or a new movie, he'd talk over me or dismiss my point with condescending. "That's a unique perspective, Dan. Very optimistic of you." He always called me Dan, a name I never used, a small theft of my own identity. If I tried to share an anecdote from my past, about my family or college, he'd jump in with a cutting remark, twisting my words into a punchline designed to make me look foolish, naive, or simple. Game nights at Emily's apartment, which had been fun, became exercises in quiet humiliation, where he'd loudly accuse me of cheating if I was winning, his voice dripping with false incredulity, or mock me for being too competitive and ruining the fun if I was losing. Movie nights were punctuated by his derisive snorts at my film choices, his sighs of boredom during scenes I loved. It was a relentless, deliberate project to make me feel small, insignificant, and unworthy in front of Emily and in front of our ever-widening circle of mutual friends. He was an expert at backhanded compliments. "Nice shirt, Dan. Didn't know they made those in tall." It was exhausting that MY initial strategy, born of love for Emily and a desire for harmony, was one of appeasement. I reasoned that his behavior must stem from a place of deep, brotherly protectiveness. I decided to kill him with kindness, to win him over through sheer force of goodwill. I invited him out for expensive craft beers, just the two of us, hoping to find common ground on neutral territory. He spent the evening talking about himself, his ambitions, his own history with Emily, making veiled comparisons between me and her more exciting exes. I asked him to play basketball at the community center, thinking some healthy, masculine competition might breed a thread of respect. He played with a vicious, unnecessary aggression, elbowing me in the ribs under the hoop and calling foul on every one of my moves. The pinnacle of my futile efforts was spending an entire sweltering Saturday in his dusty, oil-stained garage, helping him rebuild the engine of his ancient, cherry-red Mustang. I was sweating through my shirt, covered in grime, handing him wrenches and socket sets while he barked orders like a dissatisfied foreman. Never a word of thanks. It was there, with the smell of gasoline and sweat thick in the air, that he turned to me, wiped his forehead with a greasy rag, and said, "Hey, man, you got like $250 I can borrow? For the new carburetor. I'm short this week. I'll pay you back next Friday, promise." I gave it to him without a second thought, pulling the cash from my wallet, believing this financial transaction, this act of brotherly help, might somehow serve as a bond, a turning point. He never mentioned it again. When I cautiously, embarrassedly brought up with Emily weeks later, she shrugged it off with a familiar, infuriatingly casual refrain. "Oh, that's just Alex. He's terrible with money, but you know he doesn't mean any harm. He'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. She always had a justification, an excuse, a reason to deflect his behavior and defend his character. Always. Her loyalty to him was an immutable law of nature. The constant exposure to his contempt began to warp my own sense of reality, to fog my perceptions. I started to question everything. Was I being overly sensitive? Was I misreading his tone, projecting my own insecurities onto his teasing? Was I the problem? The gaslighting was profoundly effective because it didn't come from him directly. It came indirectly, through the filter of the woman I loved, whose judgment I trusted implicitly. But then I'd catch a glimpse of Chloe's pained, uncomfortable expression when he'd particularly target me, the way she'd subtly shake her head as if pleading with him to stop. Or I'd hear one of my own friends, Mark, pull me aside after a gathering, his hand on my shoulder, and ask, in a low, concerned voice, "Dude, what is that guy's problem with you? He's always on your case." Those moments were lifelines, cold water on my face, confirming that the hostility was real, it was palpable, it was observed by others, and it was not some phantom of my imagination. Alex didn't just dislike me. He despised me with a quiet passion, and he was dedicated to making sure everyone in our orbit knew it. The real final breaking point, the event that tore the already frayed fabric of our relationship asunder, was our housewarming party. After months of saving, searching, and dreaming, Emily and I had finally moved into a beautiful, sun-drenched apartment together in South Boston, with big windows that looked out over a park. It felt monumental, a concrete, undeniable step toward the future we always talked about. This wasn't just a new lease. It was a new chapter, the first page of our adult life together. We invited everyone. Friends from work, our college buddies, a few new neighbors, and of course, as was non-negotiable, Alex and Chloe. The night started perfectly, better than I could have hoped. The apartment was filled with a warm buzz of conversation, laughter, and music from the playlist we'd carefully curated together. People loved the place. They complimented our taste in furniture, the art on the walls, the light. Emily was radiant, her face flushed with happiness and pride as she moved through the crowd, a perfect hostess. I remember looking at her from across the room, holding a bottle of beer, and feeling a surge of pure, unadulterated joy so powerful it nearly brought tears to my eyes. This was it. We had made it. I thought, foolishly, hopefully, that even Alex, in the sanctified space, on this of all nights, wouldn't dare to violate the palpable happiness that filled the room. But as the night deepened and the drinks flowed more freely, the atmosphere grew looser, louder. We were all clustered in the living room, surrounded by half-empty plates of food and countless wine glasses. The air warm and happy. A good friend of ours, Sarah, raised her glass and called for a toast. The room quieted. "To Daniel and Emily," she proclaimed, her voice warm and slightly tipsy with affection. "To the perfect couple and to their beautiful new home. May it be filled with love and laughter for years to come. May you build a life here that's even better than your dreams." A chorus of "hear, hear," and "cheers" erupted around the room. Glasses clinked. Emily beamed, her eyes shimmering with happy tears, and she squeezed my hand so tightly I could feel the frantic, joyful beat of her pulse against mine. My heart felt like it would burst. And then, cutting through the warmth and goodwill like a shard of ice, came Alex's voice. He didn't shout. He said it with a calm, conversational, matter-of-fact clarity that made it even more devastating, more intentional. "Yeah, cheers, he said, his voice carrying easily. "You know you could do way better than Daniel, right? Just saying. Settling down already?" The silence was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. The music from the speakers suddenly seemed obscenely loud and inappropriate. I felt my hand go limp in Emily's. My face burned with a humiliation so profound, so public, it felt like a physical blow. 50 pairs of eyes swiveled from him. To me, to Emily, then to the floor in collective embarrassment. People shifted uncomfortably. Some muttered in disbelief. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Chloe's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror and a strange, sad recognition, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. Emily looked as if she'd been physically slapped, all the color and light draining from her face, leaving her pale and stunned. And Alex, he just leaned back against the wall, took a slow sip of his drink, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on his lips, daring me to react, finally providing the overt confrontation he'd always seemingly wanted. Something primal and long suppressed broke open inside me. A dam holding back 2 years of biting my tongue, of forced smiles, of swallowed pride, of constantly being the bigger man, finally gave way, vaporized in an instant of white-hot, pure rage. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped, frantic animal. "What did you just say?" My voice was low, but it vibrated with a fury I didn't even recognize as my own. He didn't flinch. He repeated himself, louder this time, enunciating every word slowly and clearly as if speaking to someone simple or hard of hearing. I said, "Emily could do way better than you. It's not a dig, man, just an observation." He added a casual shrug, a gesture of utter indifference that was a final, ultimate insult. I snapped. The leash broke. I unloaded 2 years of pent-up frustration and pain in a torrent of words. My voice rose, shaking with raw emotion. I shouted about how I had supported Emily through her stressful career change, how I'd held her all night when she cried over her family troubles, how I treated her with a love, patience, and respect he couldn't possibly comprehend because he was incapable of it. And in my blind, searing rage, seeking any weapon, any shard of glass to hurt him as deeply as he had just hurt me, I let slip something private, something I had never once held against her, a simple fact of our financial partnership. I pay most of the goddamn bills here. I built this home for us. Who the hell are you to come into my home and say that? The crowd gasped collectively. It was a cheap shot, and I knew at the moment the words left my mouth. I had taken a private arrangement, a team effort, and used it as public ammunition. I had fallen to his level. Alex's smirk widened, seeing his opening, his victory assured. "Hear that, Em?" he jeered, his voice dripping with fake, performative concern. "He's keeping score. Real classy, Dan. Nice." The room was spinning. The faces around me were a blur of shock and embarrassment. I was lost in a red haze. I fired back, my voice cracking with the strain. "At least I pay my own debts. Where's that $250 you borrowed and never paid back, you pathetic leech? How's the Mustang running on my money?" His smirk finally faltered. The public humiliation, the exposure of his grift, turned his face a mottled, furious red. The mask of cool indifference shattered. With a guttural, incoherent curse, he lunged at me. His fist shot out, clipping my lip, a sharp, stunning pain followed by the warm, metallic taste of blood. Instinct and 2 years of repressed anger took over completely. I swung back wildly, my fist connecting solidly with his jaw with a sickening crack. The room erupted into pure chaos. Someone, I think it was Chloe, screamed. A glass tipped over and shattered on the hardwood floor. A side table was knocked over with a crash as we grappled like animals near the entrance. We were a tangle of limbs in pure, unadulterated fury. I felt his fist land on my cheekbone, a burst of white-hot stars exploding in my vision. I roared, slamming my own fist into his stomach, driving the air from his lungs in a satisfying whoosh. Friends rushed in, pulling us apart, shouting our names, a cacophony of panic. With a final Herculean shove, aided by Mark and another friend, I propelled him to the now open apartment door and into the hallway. "Get out!" I roared, my voice raw and ragged. "Stay the hell out of my life. Out of our home." He stumbled backward, clutching his stomach, cursing my name, before turning and storming down the hall, with a crying, hysterical Chloe scrambling after him, grabbing her purse. Inside, a heavy, deafening silence descended once more, broken only by the heavy gasps of my own breathing. I stood there in the wreckage, chest heaving, tasting blood from my split lip. My cheek throbbed in a hot, painful rhythm. My hands were trembling violently. The beautiful room was a disaster zone of spilled drinks, overturned furniture, and the palpable residue of violence. I turned, my eyes searching the stunned, silent crowd for Emily. I looked at her, my heart in my throat, expecting to see her running to me, to comfort me, to dab my lip with a napkin, to share my outrage, to finally be on my side, to choose us. But instead, she pushed past our friends, her face a mask of anguish not for me, but for him. She ran to the doorway, staring down the now empty hall after him. Her voice was a desperate, broken sob, meant for his retreating back. Alex! Oh my God, Alex, are you okay? Chloe, wait. In that single crystalline moment, hearing those words, my heart didn't just break, it calcified. It turned to cold, dead ash. It simply ceased to exist within my chest. She had chosen, in the wreckage of our home, on what should have been the sacred night celebrating us. After I had been publicly insulted, provoked, and physically assaulted, her first and only concern was for him. Not for me, the man who had stood by her, loved her, built a life with her. Not for our ruined party, our shattered peace. Him, his well-being. When she finally turned back to face me, her tears for him were gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying, and utterly foreign anger directed solely at me. Why would you say those things? She hissed, her voice trembling with a rage that felt like a physical blow. Why would you embarrass me like that in front of everyone? How could you be so cruel? Throwing money in his face. I was utterly dumbfounded. The cognitive dissonance was so staggering it made me dizzy. Embarrass you? I choked out, the words barely a whisper. He told you to dump me in front of all our friends. He punched me. In our home. Why aren't you furious with him? She didn't even blink. The excuses came out, polished and ready, as they always had. He was drunk, Daniel. You know he didn't mean it. He's just protective. He gets like that. But you provoked him. You knew how he'd react. You wanted this. I reminded her, my voice rising again to a shout, that this wasn't the first time. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, a 2-year-long, relentless pattern of disrespect that she had witnessed, excused, and enabled at every single turn. We screamed at each other in the middle of our destroyed living room, surrounded by the ghosts of our party, our embarrassed friends finally slinking away one by one, unable to watch the total collapse. Finally, she yelled for everyone to get out, and when the last person had left, closing the door softly behind them, she turned to me, her eyes cold and hard, and told me to leave too. I can't even look at you right now, she said, her voice flat. Just go. I spent that night on my friend Mark's lumpy couch, staring at the water-stained ceiling, every emotion, rage, betrayal, humiliation, grief, warring inside me until I felt completely, utterly numb and empty. Over the next week, we tried to talk. There were tearful, circular phone calls that ended in stalemates and strained, painful conversations in the half-empty apartment that now felt like a tomb. She would admit, grudgingly, that Alex was out of line and went too far. She conceded that he shouldn't have put his hands on you, but she always, inevitably, circled back to the same impossible, gut-wrenching demand. If I loved her, if I truly wanted to make this work and save our relationship, I would be the bigger person. I would apologize to Alex. I would smooth things over. She said she couldn't live with her boyfriend and her best friend at war. She said he was her family, her history, the keeper of her stories, and that cutting him out was not an option. It was an amputation she refused to undergo. She framed it not as his fault, but as a test of my love, my maturity, my ability to forgive and prioritize her happiness. I stood my ground, a newfound strength solidifying in my core amidst the pain. I told her I would never, ever apologize to a man who had spent years systematically humiliating me, who had mocked me, borrowed money he never repaid, and who had finally resorted to punching me in the face in my own home. I told her the problem was not my refusal to apologize. The problem was her refusal to see the truth that had been staring her in the face for years. The problem was her skewed loyalty. She begged. She cried. She called me stubborn. And then, her voice hardening with finality that crushed what little was left of my soul, she gave me the ultimatum I now realized she'd always held in her back pocket. Apologize to Alex or we're done. I can't do this anymore. It's him or me. And in that moment, The fog of love and pain and hope finally cleared, and I saw the stark, unvarnished, devastating truth in its entirety. It wasn't about Alex anymore. It never really had been. It was about Emily, her character, her priorities, her loyalty. She didn't have my back. She never truly had. No matter how much I loved her, no matter what beautiful life we had built together, she was willing to sacrifice my dignity, my well-being, and our entire relationship on the altar of her toxic, codependent friendship just to maintain the status quo, to keep the peace with him. I finally understood that I could never win, because I was fighting for a prize that was already broken, a person who would always choose him. A week later, I went back to the apartment. Our apartment, now just a place, to pack my things into cardboard boxes. Emily sat at the kitchen table we'd picked out together at a flea market on a sunny Saturday, her face pale and streaked with silent tears. The silence in the room was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. "So this is it?" she whispered, her voice hollow and small, breaking the quiet. "You're really choosing your pride over me? Over us?" I looked at her and I felt profound, oceanic sadness, but the anger was gone. Just a vast, empty stillness. "You made me choose, Emily," I said, my voice quiet but steady, resonating in the empty space. "The moment you looked at me, bleeding in our doorway, and ran after him, the moment you demanded I apologize to my abuser, you made me choose. And you showed me, clearer than anything else ever could, that you didn't choose me. You haven't for a long time." She sobbed then, a raw, broken sound that seemed to come from the very depths of her being. "I thought you cave," she cried, her words muffled by her hands. "I thought you loved me enough to bend, to do this for me." I zipped my last bag closed. The sound was small, but in the quiet room, it was as definitive as a judge's gavel. "Love without loyalty is nothing, Emily," I said, shoulder in the bag. "It's just empty words and a beautiful prison. I can't live in it anymore." I walked out the door, down the hall, and into the elevator. The doors closed on the life I thought I would have. I didn't look back. That night, and in the long, lonely weeks that followed, I lost a woman I loved and the future I had cherished above all else. The grief was a physical weight, a constant companion. But I also learned the most vital, non-negotiable lesson of my life, that respect and loyalty are the absolute bedrock of love. They are the foundation. You cannot build a home on a fractured foundation, no matter how beautiful the furnishings. And no matter how much it hurts, no matter how much you wish with every fiber of your being that things were different, sometimes the only way to win your self-respect back, the only way to save yourself, is to find the strength to walk away from the wreckage and never, ever look back. The pain is the price of freedom, and I am finally, painfully free.